from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I am Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we will talk about whether policing needs to change in this country in 2023 and as we move forward with all of the incidences that we have had involving police today and what I believe are the challenges that police have today with the changing of American culture and society and all of the ills that we see today in our country. Welcome to Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and I am running solo today. The co-host of this show, Reverend Terry Webster, is out today, but I am so happy to have a good friend and a special guest with me today, Rick Snyder, the president of the F.O.P. 86. He has been on this podcast numerous times as we have talked about violence, particularly in Indianapolis, but also we have talked about issues nationally when it comes to the issue of the surging violence that we are seeing in cities all across the country. Welcome, Rick. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, good. Well, let's talk a little bit before we get into the topic today, because I really want to talk about policing today. And from my perspective as a lay person, I see a lot of challenges and things that are put on police departments that I'm not for sure that police are designed to handle, particularly when it comes to addressing many of the social ills of our society today that tend to lead to a lot of the violence. And I think a lot has been put on police departments to try to bring down the level of violence. And I think there are a lot of factors that is leading to what we're seeing in surges in violence across the country. But before we get into that conversation, let's kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in Indianapolis. This morning we had a couple more homicides that puts us at 34 homicides in the first, 48 days of 2023. In the two previous years where we have seen record-breaking violence in 2020, we ended February at 40 homicides, and then in 2021, which is the record-breaking year, where we ended up with 272 homicides, we ended February with 42 homicides. It seems like we're on a path to equal the numbers we've seen in 2020 and 2021. What is your view on kind of where we are and what's kind of happening in the city?
Well, I would say we are on that path. I mean, we're averaging right now so far this year a homicide every 33 hours in this city. And that is at a quicker rate than what we were seeing last year, especially at this time of the year, but really on average throughout the year. And that's alarming. Now, those are the homicides, but we've also had a total of 127 people shot, 31 people stabbed, of which 34 also died. That's 158 people shot or stabbed. And, Rev, I got to tell you what's very concerning to us in law enforcement is we're seeing a dramatic surge in the number of edged weapon attacks, those being stabbings and cuttings that are occurring, that are also leading to death in our city. And I think it's just a reminder, as you know, I've said many times, this isn't a gun violence issue, a knife violence issue, or any other kind of weapon violence issue. It's a human violence issue. Right. And until we start to address these issues of the heart that are leading to these outcomes, we will never get ahead of this.
So in talking about that, which kind of leads to, a topic for today, where is policing at today? And if we're having to deal with these heart issues, is it more difficult for law enforcement to do their job if we're having to deal with these heart issues along with the broken judicial system, particularly when it comes to repeat violent offenders, and in light of many of these high-profile cases, whether it be George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tyree Nichols, is policing today much more challenging, do you think?
Well, I think there's no question that it is. And the reason why, I mean, there's challenges that law enforcement are facing today that generations before never had to even contemplate. And there were other, one of the biggest things that we're facing right now is the breakdown of the family in our neighborhoods and in our homes throughout the communities that we serve. I mean, there were not that long ago, Rev, you had a great opportunity that even if you had to take intervention within the neighborhood and maybe you had to make an arrest, but maybe it was a traffic stop or stopping somebody on the street with a reasonable suspicion that they were in the process of committing a crime or about to commit a crime. One of the things that we had readily at our disposal was we always called it neighborhood watch, and that was usually the auntie or the grandma that was out on the front porch that we could refer that child or young adult to. We knew that there was a network of support for the families in the neighborhood, and that is all but gone. One of the greatest issues, we don't get into this a lot in public discussions. Unfortunately, we get so focused on these statistics and whether they're up, they're down, what the totals are, all those things. And in the middle of that, many lose sight that these are human beings and families that are being destroyed in the midst of this violence.
Right.
And so what our officers are seeing is the deconstruction of the nuclear family within the home, these skyrocketing rates of absent fathers that has really led to a crisis across this nation, but also in our city. I think everyone should be very concerned of what they're seeing with these rates. And, we also have had this in Indianapolis. First, it was driving the father out of the home, oftentimes which did occur with failed public policies on incarceration rates. We talk about that often, especially for nonviolent crimes.
Right.
And then on top of that, once that was done, there's been a very intentional steps that have occurred that have also attacked the mothers in the home. And we have seen across this city moms that have been drugged out, and by drugged, I mean narcotics, that have been cracked out, methed out, fentanyled out, whatever the case may be as time moves on here. And the moms are now out of the homes, leaving many of our homes parentless in a lot of ways, absent parents. And that is a great struggle for our law enforcement community. And what compounds that, Rev, you mentioned it, is a broken revolving door criminal justice system, specifically as it relates to juvenile crimes in our juvenile criminal justice system. Think about this. We just made the case that we're driving parents out of the home. And at the same time, we have a juvenile justice system that is refusing to hold juvenile offenders, and they're placing them right back into the home when an arrest is made. Well, the gap in that is they're placing them often back into a home that is lacking parental supervision or anyone to care for that child. When the arrest occurs, I often say this, when we talk about these statistics and we talk about arrests and we talk about surging violence, what is happening not just in policing, but in terms of crime and violence in general in our neighborhoods, is simply police are simply holding up a mirror to the community. By the time you get to police intervention that involves arrests, use of force incidents, intervention, incarceration, all those other things, there has already been catastrophic failures within society, right, within the family. And, that's the big concern. So we're seeing surges now, not just in the violence, but we're seeing surges in edged weapon attacks, which is unusual. We're seeing surges in female victimization of homicides and female suspects in homicides, shootings, non-fatal stabbings. Then we're also seeing a significant increase in juvenile victimization and juvenile offenders related to homicides, non-fatal shootings, and stabbings as well. So you see this perfect combination that's going on. Police cannot fix the societal family dynamics and issues that are going on, but we can raise the issue and point to it. I'll leave you this one last stat since we talk about them so much. Nationally, Rev, the national average is 1 in 4 children in our country are without a biological step or adoptive father in the home. And one of the stats that I found amazing about that is that's enough children to fill New York City twice and Los Angeles 4 times over. Now, that gives you some perspective.
Wow. This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and my guest today is Rick Snyder, president of the F.O.P. 86. Rick, are police departments feeling the pressure then with all of the things that you just talked about in trying to, address the violence issue in light of all the other challenges? It seemed like to me that a lot of pressure is being put on police departments, and you kind of sense it in statements that police chiefs are making and other who may be high-ranking police officers when it comes to the violence. I think people tend to look to the police to fix this problem, and it seems to be a lot more challenging today. Well,
here again, I think the outcomes are what speak for themselves. And by the time that it gets to law enforcement, we've already had significant fractures, societal fractures that have led up to that point. Listen, we've been facing this catastrophic perfect storm of a mental health crisis contributed to narcotics-induced deliriums, compounded then by fentanyl and the scourge of fentanyl in our communities. Rev, in Indianapolis alone, in 1 year, we had over 800 overdose deaths in our city.
Wow.
Now, that's the capital city of your state.
Wow.
And we had over 800 overdose deaths in our city in 1 year, and 80+% of those were fentanyl related. So you tell me, how are we supposed, as law enforcement, to intervene in that? And the tragedy becomes we're the ones picking up the pieces on the backside once the correct catastrophic event has already occurred. I say this all the time. I meet with different groups and have these discussions, and I think a lot of times people get this false perception that there's a negative personal connection for the law enforcement officer, that they are out here just, the dispersion that's cast is that officers are just wanting to arrest everybody and lock them up.
Right.
Nothing could be further from the truth. Rev, you and I have personal history where, efforts have revolved around a focus on education, prevention, and community collaboration.
Right.
So there's a much less need for intervention. We can be proactive on that front, but we can't do it when we are overwhelmed by the wave, the tsunami, if you will, of violence that's occurring in our city. And when you look at Indianapolis, you talk about a mental health crisis. I would ask you, what's being done on that front when it comes to especially inpatient mental health facilities? Now, let's face it, when we look around the city, and oftentimes when we explore our issues of homelessness in our city, but also violence that occurs in our city, there invariably seems to be some kind of a connection to mental health. Right. And I'll prove it to you.
Right.
Who's the number one mental health provider in Marion County, in Indianapolis? The number one inpatient mental health provider in the county is the Marion County Sheriff.
Right.
Now, what does that tell us? And so what we have seen was we saw a deinstitutionalization move at the end of the last century coming into the 2000s. And the problem with that is that it was never backed up with robust outpatient facilities, especially at the neighborhood level. And so when that whole process was gutted, quite frankly, it left the problem in the lap of law enforcement. Now, some people will bastardize that, and they'll take the approach to say, well, then that's why we need to defund the police to fund these other things. That is a fallacy as well. And we've seen that now over the last 3 years fall flat on its face. What you have to do is fully fund that strong education, prevention, community collaboration, but also that intervention component through law enforcement. At the same time, you have to properly fund resources that are the stopgap measures that help prevent all of those problems landing back into the lap of law enforcement. We're the first to say we'll never arrest our way out of this problem. But you also can't discount holding repeat violent offenders accountable. So there has to be a balance here, and the problem is we've had people that have tipped the scales to intentionally unbalance the system, and it's our community, our neighborhoods, and our homes that are bearing the brunt of it.
Well, that seems to be really a problem all over the country. I just got back, almost 2 weeks ago, well, a week and a half ago from New York City, and it was the same concern in New York City as yesterday. I was in a conversation with city officials in Cleveland, Ohio. Everywhere you go, or people that you talk to from cities all across the country, certainly there is a concern about this broken judicial system that is not holding repeat violent offenders accountable. And when police have to rearrest them time and time again, they tend to be the trigger pullers or the person that is involved in an incident where someone is stabbed and injured or stabbed and killed. How do we address that as a society? I think most people are pretty frustrated by that and really don't know other than how do we address the court system, in this city and in cities across the country.
Well, it's the great challenge that we're facing, as you said, in major cities across the nation, but definitely in Indianapolis and Marion County, which is how do you hold those within the judiciary branch accountable for the decisions that they're making? Now, I will say this, in their defense, they also are playing cards that they're dealt from the person who is responsible for bringing cases before them, which is the prosecutor in any county in our nation. And in Marion County, you see this compounding effect of a prosecutor that's giving sweetheart plea deals, that is dismissing charges, especially charges that involve weapons, at an alarming rate. And then at the same time, courts that are accepting those plea bargains, those plea deals, but also doing lenient modified sentences that they're within the parameters of sentencing guidelines, but they're consistently on the low end. And then on top of that, you find out that you don't even serve that full sentence. And so I think there has to be some kind of a discussion that if the judiciary branch, quite frankly, can't get its act together, the people's representatives need to step in through the legislative branch and provide tighter parameters in which they operate. And there is nothing wrong with ensuring accountability. I mean, the judiciary, legislative, and executive branches of all governments have no problems ensuring accountability, transparency for law enforcement, those who are responsible for enforcing the very laws they all create. There shouldn't be a problem with that same level of accountability for those who are in the decision-making chairs that are supposed to be dispensing justice in our communities.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and my guest is, for those who are just joining, is Rick Snyder, president of the F.O.P. 86. Rick, we haven't had a chance to really talk, and certainly not publicly, about what happened in Memphis with Tyree Nichols. And two questions I have for you as a law enforcement officer. What did you think about that? What are you hearing from the law enforcement community? And does incidences like that set police and community relationships back when things like that happen and are seen the video on national TV?
Well, the president of our National Fraternal Order of Police made it very clear in his statement following this tragic incident is that this incident alone has easily set back the law enforcement profession by 5 years. Wow. And when he's saying that, he's talking as it relates to law enforcement and community relations. And I think there's validity to that. I think without a doubt, it requires all of us to come to the table and redouble our efforts even more. I think one thing that was interesting is that, the Fraternal Order of Police is the recognized voice of law enforcement in our nation. We represent well over 365,000 law enforcement officers and their families. And in doing so, our overall organization issued a very strong statement condemning the actions that were taken in Memphis. And that statement alone, Rev, in just 1 week, had 4.1 billion, that's with a B,
wow.
billion views around the world.
Wow.
And so I think it sent a very strong and powerful message. Now, in the same respect, on the other hand, we always are consistent to also call for firm, fair, and consistent reviews of any actions by law enforcement officers. So you've got this incident in Memphis, which in no way represents law enforcement professionalism or the training that's received. I mean, here again, when you see these terrible incidents like George Floyd, like the incident in Memphis, the consistent message that you hear back from law enforcement professionals is nothing that I'm seeing here matches up with the way that we are trained. And this incident was no different. And so what that says is, then what else is at play here? I think it definitely drives us back to what kind of to ensuring that we maintain high standards for our profession in our training, that we don't allow those standards and those trainings to be cut in any way. I mean, that's the big concern when you hear people with the mantra of defund the police. The first thing that gets defunded and cut is the training and the qualifications required for law enforcement officers. Well, that doesn't do anything to help the issues. And so we have to say there has to be a very I would say strategic but deliberate focus and investment on law enforcement training. People say, well, what should be done with standards? I say, if anything, you raise them. People always rise to what the standards are. And start with the entry-level standards for law enforcement. Raise those standards. But what you're seeing, Reverend, is we have a retention and a recruitment crisis within the profession because officers have been demonized, dehumanized, demoralized through this defund the police debate and attacks on law enforcement officers.
Right.
And as a result of that, we see communities that are running in the opposite direction. They're wanting to lower the entrance standards, which will do nothing but, again, create a compounding snowball effect of tragedies, but also corruption within the profession. And it's a recipe for disaster. 3 years ago, Reverend, I said outside the White House, we are in a season where we are decriminalizing the criminals and at the same time depolicing the police, and that it's a recipe for disaster. I would propose to you that 3 years later, that has been proven exactly correct.
Well, certainly that is a concern. I think when you hear from leaders in Memphis and even, residents and some who are retired police officers in Memphis, I think the concern is that because of the retention issues and officers retiring, because of the whole defund the police, movement, that the standard has been lowered. And it seemed to me as I watched that, I really didn't see any supervision out there based on the videos that were shown.
Sure.
And they seemed to be younger officers. That was just my perception of it. And I was wondering, have the veteran officers left the department? Have they retired? And this is what we have in a specialized unit like that probably has a lot of pressure on them to try to deal with the rising crime and violence that Memphis is experiencing.
Well, Rev, I think, you've been around long enough. You've seen ebbs and flows within the profession, times where we get staffing closer to where it needs to be, and then also times where it bottoms out. We had a very difficult time, 2008 through 2013 in this city, where we had abysmal staffing numbers. We just were flat out not hiring and watching people walk out the door at the same time. It tipped the scales to where our agency reached a point where 4 out of every 10 officers were eligible to retire and walk out the door on any given day.
Wow.
And what that placed us into the position of is that we needed our officers, quite frankly, more than they needed us. And then as we started to attack them, demonize them, demoralize them, they just said, hey, at the same time, they were seeing rising attacks on officers. Remember, Reverend, we're in a time period where we're seeing an officer shot in the line of duty once every 25 hours in our nation.
Right.
That's just being shot.
Right.
Doesn't include all the other attacks. An officer dying in the line of duty once every 52 hours. I hear critics say, well, there are other professions that are more deadly, like loggers, tree fallers, people who work on railroads, all these other things. My point in that is their customers are not trying to kill them. But that is occurring in law enforcement.
Right.
And so when you have those variables in the formula, people throw up their hands in disgust and they leave the profession because you've stripped the why out of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Well, at the same time, it's very difficult then to get people to say, I think I want to go and do that job. Well, that's not going to happen when they're watching all those things occur. And to your point, what happens is you get this pressure that pushes down on the seniority in your agency, the average seniority. You end up with a very young, less experienced, I said less, not inexperienced, but less experienced workforce. And at the same time, your overall staffing numbers are lower. In Indianapolis, we are quickly approaching 1,500 officers. If we hit that number, that'll make us 350 officers short of what we're funded to be at.
Wow.
When that happens, you push the overall seniority average down, and at the same time, it's harder to promote people up because you need them on the front lines because you don't have enough to support the services you're providing.
Right.
So this combination leads to a reduction in services. You have to narrow what services you're going to provide. And people say, well, maybe that's what we should do. I always ask this, what service do you want us to cut first? Do you want it to be our PAL Club, our community affairs, crime prevention, mounted patrol? What things like that do you want us to cut first? Because those are the first things to go. Do you want us to cut our mental health response teams? Those are the things that get narrowed and cut. And so you get a reduction in services, a lower seniority average for the agency, less supervisors, an opportunity for advancement, and overall less service provided to the taxpayers. And that is the real-world outcomes of this mess that we've created over the last few years that people have used to leverage for the benefit of other agendas. And it's the most marginalized in our communities that are suffering at the hands of that. And so that's why we've got to push back and be consistent in the points that we make.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and my guest is Rick Snyder, president of the F.O.P. 86. Rick, where do you see policing then with the picture that you have painted in the next 5 to 10 years in America? If there's going to be this shortage of law enforcement officers, particularly you probably see it more so in major cities, what is policing going to look like 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Well, I think the bigger question is, what's our society going to look like? Because whatever our society is going to look like, it's going to replicate itself in what the police service is required to do.
Well, I'm concerned about what society is going to look like, particularly as a pastor. I'm very concerned. Yes.
That's the point that oftentimes people don't want to talk about.
Right.
Now, a few years ago, I was on air live on Fox 59 on the Red Couch, and I was asked, what's it going to take to change these things? And I said, it's not popular, but we have got to get back to basics.
Yeah.
And then I did something that you probably haven't seen most people do, but I'm rooted in it, and I raised a Holy Bible up on live television.
Right.
And I said, this is the only thing that's going to get us out of this situation.
Amen.
And we have got to turn back to God, and our churches, being the people, have to come out of the four corners of our structures, our buildings, and engage in society and in the neighborhoods. There is a deep hunger and thirst for God's presence in the lives of everyone. And you see that, I always say this, even if you don't believe in God, you believe in some kind of a God.
Right.
If you turn your back on God, the Creator, you turn it towards some other God, some other idol, whether that be your cell phone, whether that be the addiction issue that you're facing, whether that be the mental health crisis that you're wrapped up within. There is hope, and there are expectations you can have by driving back into your faith. We always want to talk about the physical needs of our society, rightfully so.
Right.
We want to talk about the mental, emotional needs of our society, rightfully so.
Right.
But there is also a third leg to the stool, which is the spiritual needs, the spiritual wellness of a society, and we have got to drive back into that. So I encourage you as a reverend, I encourage myself as an officer, I encourage myself as a chaplain, I encourage the church to, again, come out of its four walls. In Indianapolis, Marion County, we have well over 1,200 houses of worship. It's one of the highest concentration of houses of worship in the nation. There has got to be a way that faith leaders, and I would say of all faiths, can come out of their buildings, out of their structures, and engage the society, because you have a society that is not just hungry for it, but that is literally dying for it.
Well, that is so true, and certainly one of my concerns, because I just, see a lack of moral compass in this country today, and it displays itself in so many ugly ways, and leads to a lot of the tragedies and the violence that we are seeing, in cities all across the country. So certainly I am very concerned about that as I see it, not just as a local pastor, but the work I do with 10 Point, which is very, very concerning. One other question before I let you go, and I know you have some place to be. What do you see happening in Indianapolis this year? Are you concerned that this is going to be another bad year?
I absolutely am. I have no doubt, based on the trends that we've already seen in the first 2 months, that we are set to exceed 200 homicides again in this city. That would make for the fourth year in a row. For the life of me, I don't see how people can't get a handle on this, that never in the history, 200 plus years, we've never been over 200 homicides in the city of Indianapolis until the last 3 years in a row. So what happened? What changed? And, right now we're currently on a pace where we're running an average of reaching 259 homicides for this year unless it's interrupted. And that's higher than what it was last year. So what's concerning is the trends are outpacing this point in time last year, which suggests that the trajectory that we are on is there's a greater frequency and a higher level of violence, and something has to change. Again, the greatest stopgap measure we have at our disposal is to close that revolving door specifically for repeat violent offenders, so that we then get breathing room and time to be able to address in a proactive measure these other gaps in our society. We've got to do both. It's not an either-or proposition.
Rick, thank you so much for joining me today on this broadcast, and I really appreciate you coming on and having these discussions about, this whole issue of policing in this country, and certainly the issue of crime and violence as it impacts all of us. This has been Reverend Charles Harrison on Real Talk. Join me next time as I bring you more Real Talk about real issues that affect our communities here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter. This is Reverend Charles Harrison, and I pray that you have a blessed and awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.